History is filled with plagues, the Black Death, which swept away a third of Europe. The Spanish flu, a modern scourge of terrifying speed. We understand these events. We can identify the bacteria, the viruses, the microscopic agents of death. But what if a plague had no discernible cause? What if the sickness wasn't in the blood, but in the mind? Our story takes us to the summer of 1518, to the bustling city of Strasbourg, in the heart of the Holy Roman Empire. It was a city teetering on the edge of despair. Years of brutal winters, failed harvests, and rampant disease had left its people starving and desperate. They prayed for salvation, but none came. Instead, something else arrived, something inexplicable. It didn't begin with a cough or a fever or a rash. It began with a dance, a single woman, dancing alone in the oppressive summer heat. There was no music. There was no celebration. There was only a frantic, convulsive movement that she could not stop. This is the story of the dancing plague of 1518, one of history's most bizarre and terrifying unsolved mysteries, a time when an entire city was gripped by a madness that forced them to dance and dance until they died. It all started in mid-July with a woman named Frau Troffea. We know little about her, only that on one fateful day, she stepped out of her half-timbered home and onto the cobblestone street, and she began to dance. Eyewitness accounts preserved in city records and sermons from the time are chillingly consistent. This was not a dance of joy. Her face was a mask of anguish. Her body twisted and jerked in spasms, her arms flailing, her feet stomping against the hard ground. She danced without music, without reason, and without rest. Her husband and neighbors pleaded with her to stop, but she seemed not to hear them. She was trapped inside her own body, a prisoner of some unseen rhythm. For hours, the spectacle continued under the hot sun. As night fell, she was still there, her movements becoming more ragged, her body soaked in sweat. She danced all through the night. She danced through the next day and the day after that. According to some accounts, she danced for nearly 6 days, stopping only for brief moments of unconscious collapse before her body would shudder back to life, and the frantic movements would begin again. Her feet were bruised and bleeding. Her body was ravaged by dehydration and exhaustion, but she could not stop. At first it was a local curiosity, a madwoman perhaps possessed by a demon. But then the unthinkable happened. The madness began to spread. Within a week, another person had joined her, then a few more. They were mostly younger women at first, their bodies suddenly seized by the same uncontrollable compulsion. They didn't dance with Frau Troffea. They danced alongside her, each lost in their own private, agonizing trance. The lone spectacle had become a small, disturbing troupe. The phenomenon spread like a virus. By the end of the first week, over 30 people were dancing. The city authorities were baffled and alarmed. This was no longer a local disturbance. It was a public crisis. The small groups of dancers swelled into a terrifying, writhing crowd. Within a month, the chronicles claim that around 400 citizens of Strasbourg were caught in the grip of this bizarre plague. The streets of the city, once filled with the sounds of commerce and prayer, now echoed with the ceaseless, horrifying stomp of dancing feet and the gasps of utter exhaustion. The City Council of Strasbourg, comprised of the city's wealthiest guildsmen and nobles, was forced to act. They consulted the leading physicians of the era, examining the dancers, the doctors, relying on the ancient Greek theory of the four humors, reached a diagnosis. This was not a supernatural affliction, they declared, but a natural disease caused by hot blood overheating the brain. Their prescription, based on this flawed diagnosis, would prove to be catastrophic. They reasoned that the only way to cure the dancers was to let them burn off this excess heat. The patients, they argued, needed to dance it out of their system. They had to achieve a state of total exhaustion, at which point the feverish blood would cool and the affliction would cease. And so, the authorities embarked on one of the most misguided public health interventions in history. They decided to facilitate the dancing. They cleared out the city's large grain market, creating an open-air dance hall. To further encourage the cure, they erected a large wooden stage in its center. Then, in a move of spectacular folly, they hired professional musicians, Drummers, fiddlers, and pipers were paid to provide a constant, driving rhythm, believing that the music would keep the afflicted moving and help them burn through the disease more quickly. They even hired healthy dancers to dance alongside the sick, to guide them and keep them motivated. The result was the exact opposite of what they intended. The official sanctioning of the dancing transformed the terrifying plague into a bizarre public spectacle. The stage, the music, the crowds of onlookers. It amplified the phenomenon on a massive scale. For those teetering on the edge of the same psychological precipice, this official stage may have been the final push. The sight and sound of the frenzied dance was a powerful hypnotic suggestion. The number of dancers exploded. The grim reality of this cure soon became apparent. The dancers were not being cured, they were being killed. Day after day, under the relentless summer sun, the macabre festival continued. People would dance until their bodies simply gave out. They collapsed from heart attacks, strokes, and sheer physical exhaustion. Contemporary accounts speak of dozens of deaths each day. The stage built to cure them had become their execution block. The music hired to heal them was their funeral dirge. The city council's cure was worse than the disease. Realizing their catastrophic error, the authorities reversed course. They banned all public dancing and music. The dancers were rounded up and taken to a shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus, a Christian martyr who, according to legend, could inflict curses of uncontrollable dancing. There, they were made to pray for forgiveness. Slowly, over several weeks, the plague subsided. But the question remained, and it haunts us to this day. What actually happened? Let's examine the evidence like historical detectives and analyze the leading theories. Theory A, the curse of Saint Vitus. This was the most common explanation at the time. The people of 1518 lived in a world saturated with supernatural belief. To them, a plague of this nature could only be the work of a vengeful saint. Saint Vitus was the patron saint of dancers and entertainers, but it was also believed he could punish sinners with a dancing mania. The cure, therefore, was religious penance. While this explains how the people of the era perceived the event, it offers no scientific explanation and has been completely dismissed by modern historians. Theory B, ergot poisoning. This was the first major scientific theory proposed in the 20th century. It points to a physical culprit, a fungus called Claviceps purpurea, or ergot, which grows on damp stalks of rye, the primary grain used for bread in that region. Ergot contains powerful psychoactive chemicals, most notably ergotamine, from which LSD is derived. The condition it causes, ergotism, has two forms. One is gangrenous, causing tissues to die and limbs to fall off. The other is convulsive, causing painful seizures, muscle spasms, and vivid hallucinations. On the surface, this seems plausible. The idea of an entire city accidentally tripping on a natural psychedelic is compelling. The spasms could be mistaken for dancing. However, a closer look reveals critical flaws in this theory. First, while ergot causes muscle spasms, it does not enable coordinated, sustained physical activity for days on end. In fact, ergotism restricts blood flow to the extremities, making such endurance dancing physically impossible. Second, there are no historical accounts from 1518 mentioning the other telltale symptoms of ergotism, such as hallucinations or gangrene. Third, it's highly unlikely that a batch of poisoned grain would affect 400 people in exactly the same way over a period of weeks. For these reasons, most modern experts have concluded that ergotism was not the cause. Theory C, mass psychogenic illness. This brings us to the most widely accepted and perhaps most disturbing explanation. Mass psychogenic illness, or mass hysteria, is a phenomenon where physical symptoms spread through a group of people with no physiological cause. It is, in essence, a social virus that infects the mind. To understand this, we must return to the state of Strasbourg in 1518. This was a community living under unbearable, chronic stress. Famine was a constant reality. The poor were starving. A series of devastating diseases, including syphilis, smallpox, and leprosy, were rampant. The people felt powerless, trapped in a world of suffering they believed was a sign of God's wrath. Their minds were a fertile ground for extreme psychological reactions. In this pressure cooker environment, Frau Troffea may have experienced what psychologists call a dissociative state, a trance brought on by extreme distress. Her dance was an unconscious physical manifestation of her psychological torment. In a community that was deeply superstitious and already primed for panic, her public, bizarre behavior acted as a trigger. For others, suffering under the same immense stress, their minds subconsciously latched onto her behavior as a permissible, if terrifying, way to express their own pent-up anxiety and trauma. The act of dancing became a contagious idea. The more people who joined, the more real the phenomenon seemed, creating a feedback loop of hysteria. The authorities' decision to build a stage and hire musicians validated the sickness in the public eye, giving it legitimacy and encouraging its spread. The dancers were not faking it. Their suffering was real. They were trapped in a psychological state where the mind had lost control of the body. They were, quite literally, dancing out the terror that their conscious minds could no longer contain. The dancing plague of 1518 was not a curse from a vengeful saint, nor was it the effect of a hidden poison. The evidence overwhelmingly points to a profound psychological breakdown, a tear in the collective psyche of a community pushed beyond its breaking point. It was a terrifying demonstration of the power of the human mind to manifest its deepest fears and anxieties in the physical world. The event stands as a stark reminder of the fragility of the human mind and the incredible power of social contagion. It shows that under the right conditions of extreme stress, fear, and shared belief, sanity itself can become a plague. The people of Strasbourg were not afflicted by a microbe, but by a shared nightmare from which they could not wake. Their story, bizarre as it is, resonates even today. In our modern world, filled with its own anxieties, from social media panics to viral conspiracy theories, we see echoes of the same psychological mechanisms at play. Perhaps the dancing plague is not just a strange historical footnote. Perhaps it is a timeless warning that the most dangerous plagues are not always the ones that attack the body, but the ones that capture the mind.